think there's a big misconception about what it is in terms of like being close to like end times, Bible prophecy stuff, putting a chip in your arm. And that's not what it is, right? It's very basic tasks. Like it takes an identical situation and it then reacts the same way every single time. So it just takes out all that redundancy of human work.
Put that coffee down.
I'm not here to waste your time, okay? I certainly hope you're not here to waste mine. So I'm gonna keep this short.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information. Wouldn't you agree?
Coffee's for closers only.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Behind Your Back podcast with me, Bradley Hartman, founder and CEO of the Behind Your Back Sales Company. Our mission in life is to help LBM companies sell more, faster, at higher margin, and have more fun doing it. That's right. Even if there's a pandemic, even if we're going into a new year with a pandemic, we can still have fun. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Anyway, in this podcast, we talk about leadership, personal productivity, time management, and the craft of selling in the construction industry. Now, I am thrilled to share with you that this episode is brought to you by Capital One Trade Credit, our new presenting sponsor that we are thrilled to be partnering with. Now, in episode 234, the executive leaders at Capital One Trade Credit, Scott Simpson and Sean Cunningham, joined the show to talk about 4 things that we are passionate about: improving cash flow, growing sales, reducing risk, and leveraging technology to simplify the building of America. And I'm excited to bring to you today my conversation with one Melanie Bisson on that last point, leveraging technology. That's what our conversation is about today as we start thinking about how artificial intelligence, AI, can be applied to the LBM industry and is currently being applied by other companies whose services and products we are using every day. Now, I met Melanie at the LBM Strategies Conference in Boston in October. It was a great event. I was thrilled to attend. I learned a lot from a lot of the other speakers and people that were there. I also enjoyed speaking. I presented on Yes, Fear Works with Carl Moyer of the Parr Lumber Company. We presented an early version of our 5 best chapters of our upcoming book. If you are interested in getting a free copy of that, we still have some extras. I'd be happy to ship them to you at no cost while supplies last. That's really important. While supplies last. Don't have a million of them just yet, but this July of 2022, we will be done. Thrilled to get that into your hands. Anyway, I was thrilled to attend the LBM Strategies Conference. And while this discussion was happening, in the corner of the room, I hear someone make a very insightful point. And I write down in my notepad, A, who the hell is that? And B, find out who it is and talk to her. So I did. I was very coachable to my own notes. I followed up with her and ended up talking to Melanie. We hit it off. I was super impressed with her. You talk to her for a few minutes and you realize that A, she has a very sharp sense of humor, and B, she's operating at a very high level. She's extremely bright, and I learned a lot from her. We started talking about AI. And I said, I am largely ignorant, but I want to get smarter in the future. She recommended a couple books. So I got caught up to speed a little, still largely dumb on this entire topic, but not as dumb. And that's the whole key to living. Just be less dumb than yesterday. That's my goal. So who is Melanie? Well, Melanie attended Syracuse University, go Orange. She got her MBA at Vanderbilt University, very swanky. And she's getting her doctorate in education at Baylor University. Go Bears. Look at you getting her doctorate. Big time. Doctor. Coming down the pike next year. She's going to be a doctor. She got out of school, got out of Syracuse, started working at Ferguson. She then went to Sherwin-Williams, was at Rockwool for several years, and is now the director of LBM Sales at Grabber. So she has been in lots of different aspects of our industry. She's extremely bright. And you, my friend, you are going to learn more about our industry, about artificial intelligence, and you will be smarter for it. She dragged me along every step of the way, and I had a blast. That's all we've got. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Miss Melanie Bisson. Miss Melanie Bisson, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you bet. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and I will tell you 2 things are happening right now. Number one, I have never theoretically invested this much time to be prepared for a topic, and yet never felt so inadequate. I've skimmed and I've burned through about 3 different books. That's probably, 700 pages, and yet still kind of like, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm the guy to explain this. So I think together we can improve the understanding overall about artificial intelligence and things that go through it. But anyway, I'm thrilled you're here.
Thank you. I'm nodding my head in agreement for those who can't see. Yeah.
All right. So we're going to start off with our a quick first 4 to learn a little bit about you. Actually, I'm going to throw in a first 5. First question. Do you ever allow someone to pronounce your last name with a French pronunciation? Because the idea of Melanie Bisson is fantastic.
Thank you. Because my first name is French, and the company I worked for 9 years was based in Canada. And every single time I got on an Air Canada flight, they pronounced it authentically, and I just like lit up on the inside. It's so lovely to hear.
All right.
Because usually you get bison, and it's like there's 2 S's, like you're butchering it. Yeah.
Yes. So how would you pronounce Melanie? What does that sound like in French?
It's the same, but together, with their French accent, it's just
Melanie Bisson. Yeah, absolutely. That is incredible. Yeah. Okay. I was fully prepared for you to say, no, please don't do that again. And we'd keep rolling. But all right.
Yeah.
There's the unofficial first one. Melanie, do you remember the first music album you either purchased or received?
I do. And when I saw that, I said right out the gate, he was trying to tell my age to his listeners. It was Christmas of 96 or 97. So I'll say like 7th or 8th grade, but it was a trio. It was no doubt Tragic Kingdom.
All right.
Celine Dion, I think it's Something Falling on You from that year. And then Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill.
It's not fair to deny me all the cross I bear that you did to me. You ought to know.
So you got a couple of classics in there. And Celine Dion, I guess, was a little bit offbeat there, but also
13-year-old girl.
Generational, for sure. Okay. Do you remember the first concert you attended and where that was?
It had to be somewhere in New England, but it was Shania Twain.
Oh, all right. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
First job, the first one where you were paying taxes to the government on it.
Yep. Took the bus from school to a place called Adventureland. It was kind of like a regional discovery zone, like the ball pit for kids, sort of Billy B's of,
Yes.
20 years ago. I was a birthday party host, so I would get like $20 tips to put out pizza and cake for little kids.
Yes, I know exactly the role that you speak of. Okay. And your first vehicle?
Mazda 626. Stick.
With pride. Color?
Tan.
Did it have a name?
That one did not. It was the neon after.
What? I got to ask. What was the name of the neon that came after?
Sally.
What was it?
Sally.
Oh, I thought you said very sadly. I was like, what's so sad about it?
Sally. Typical, like 17-year-old girl, just. The neon was impressive because it had a spoiler on the back that was black, so you think you're really, really cool at that point.
Yeah, really leveraging the wind there to speed up the neon to get the horsepower. Yeah, okay. All right. So let's dive in. I'll create the framework and you can kind of fill in the details. So a few months ago, there was an ongoing discussion about technology in general. I was excited to listen in on it. It quickly fell into the realm about customer relationship management software, which seemed to me like it was cutting edge if it was like 2007 or 2008. And I remember thinking, I thought we were going to be talking about something completely different, artificial intelligence or like, dude, the singularity. I'm like, what's coming next? What's the future? I kept this to myself. And then you spoke the very thing that I was thinking about. And I said, who is this human being? I need to talk to her. We got to get into this. So give me just a little bit of that context and what was going on in your mind and what caused you to speak up.
Yeah, I think probably similar to you, I saw something on the program agenda that said innovation, technology, and said, out of all the sessions that were available, especially with me being a vendor, that's the one I want to sit in on, right? Like some type of round table with, manufacturers and
right.
dealers. And yeah, a little bit disappointingly, right? It turns into a familiar conversation around like tips and tricks and habits,
Right.
as opposed to some really brainstorming things around innovation and improvements around technology. And it sort of fell into the traditional definition of technology, which is how do we use our computers? How do we use our systems today? As opposed to what opportunity is available. And so I was kind of itching that whole time. And some of it, is to stir the pot a little bit. Most people who know me as a challenger. I'm that type of salesperson that's always seeking new information and asking questions to challenge the norm. But that was really what my question surrounding, well, how are we actually utilizing machine learning and AI as an industry? And I got so many people who came up to me afterwards. So it was neat to see like, hey, there's a lot of interest here. Maybe we just don't know how to quite talk about it yet.
Yeah. No, I think that's really well said. And I will start off with maybe this fact that I found just fascinating. And I have a general rule that I think about often, which is what I call the deep throat principle of predicting the future, which Hoffman and Robert Redford, Washington Post, Watergate. This is like a fun game where I've tried to, what movie I'm talking about with deep throat in it? Anyway, they're meeting this guy in the garage and his message is, if you want to get to the bottom of this, just follow the money. And I'm always wondering, where is money flowing from people who have capital and to smart people who wanted to grow the businesses? So in 2020, there was over $38 billion in venture capital that went in the United States, another $25 billion from Asia, and $8 billion in the EU, for a net total of $71 billion was funded directly to AI companies. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, because I think we have reached the point of human capability where we have too much tenure and something new needs to come in to scale businesses, operations, the digital model and sort of where we're at today operationally. Like you can only adopt so many new users, so many new customers, whatever your industry defines that transfer of dollars and value, service or product. You can only scale so much with human capability. You can only add so many salespersons. You can only add so many engineers and people. And so at some point, something had to shift. And there's only a handful of industries left, I think, that have not adopted it. So now you're just seeing capital being poured into every single industry to take advantage of it, because I think we're realizing that it is not excluded to just what you would define as a technology company.
Right.
That education can involve technology, construction can involve technology. All these things that are typically hands-on, paper-driven, need a shift if they're going to grow and expand.
Mm-hmm. So how would you define artificial intelligence?
Computers learning to act as humans. So it's machines making cognitive moves for behavior such as decision-making, making recommendations, problem-solving. And there's sort of four different types, two of which are way, way beyond our scope, right? We sort of joked about that inadequacy at the beginning, but you and I are talking about this in relation to our industry, not, where it's super, super going in the future. But there's, at its basis, it's how computers are reacting to information. So you can give it some predisposed information, some basic formulas, but rather than like coding every single string of information, the computer is taking that in and behaving as if a human would. And over time, it is able to predict behavior and act as a human would, taking away all those simple tasks.
Yeah. And maybe I'll read this. So kind of read and breezed through about 3 different books. One of them that you recommended, Competing in the Age of AI. I thought that was helpful. Parts of it I struggled with a little bit. Then I went this book by Nick Bostrom that was highly recommended called Superintelligence. This got more into, unsurprisingly by the title, like what it would take for humans to really be super intelligent and some of the risk factors, and kind of went more towards the singularity where machines take over humans and that sort of stuff. I kind of dropped that halfway through. It was very dense. The last book I read, I'm going to read a clip from, was by Henry Kissinger, obviously who probably people know, former Secretary of State, Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google and Alphabet, and then, I don't know, some MIT, Harvard guy, I didn't look up, some nerd named Daniel Huttenlocher. Anyway, the book's called The Age of AI, and I thought this was, at least for my novice level of understanding, I thought this was the best one. But I'll read a quick little quote here and then have you expand on it. It It says, at its heart, AI is about performing tasks, about creating machines capable of devising and executing competent solutions to complex problems. Researchers realized that a new approach was required, one that would allow machines to learn on their own. In short, a conceptual shift occurred. We went from attempting to encode human distilled insights into machines to delegating the learning process itself to machines. So for me, when I read that, I'm like, okay, artificial intelligence, kind of to your point, this is machines with something close, human-like intelligence. And then kind of machine learning is, hey, what are these algorithms or these series of steps computationally that can, through trial and error and millions of repetitions, learn on the go? For me, I was like, okay, there's 50 words that help me kind of grasp this. What, as I read that and we're talking about it, you're nodding your head, what are you thinking?
Yeah, because I think there's a big misconception about what it is in terms of like being close to like end times, Bible prophecy stuff, putting a chip in your arm. And that's not what it is, right? It's very basic tasks. Like it takes an identical situation and it then reacts the same way every single time. So it just takes out all that redundancy of human work. So it's not as intimidating to an individual like myself who tries to have technology be something that is always filling in a gap or creating something new. It's using science and knowledge in a balance. I hate having like stuff all around me. We don't have Alexas in the house, like that kind of stuff. But this still resonates with me because it takes out all of those annoying tasks and makes something very basic heck of a lot more productive.
So Melanie, I'm going to give two quick examples that are in the book that I thought were powerful. And then maybe you can kind of share some other examples that are around us that many of our listeners, or probably all of our listeners, are using today that they might not be aware of. But they talked about, they open up with this chess playing, obviously with the Queen's Gambit, and everyone's fascinated with chess. And right, there are specific rules. You can only move certain places with the 6 pieces. And yet there's millions of moves. What they did, they said, after training for just 4 hours by playing against itself, AlphaZero emerged as the world's most effective chess program. So this idea in the past, we would load in all these past games and the rules and what Gary Kasparov did. This way is, hey, we're just going to tell you, actually they use this quote, which I loved, this idea of victory conditions. So we're going to give you rules and we're going to give you some conditions of victory. And then that's it. You're going to do the learning on your own and wherever you go. And then they also cited this one for this antibiotic. They gave it the rules. They gave it like 2,000 molecules to kind of review. It then went through another 61,000, so millions of different combinations, and returned one molecule that they could focus on. And it's this antibiotic now called Halicin, which they think is going to be revolutionary. Currently today, the people who put together the program have no idea how the artificial intelligence came up with this result. So now they're trying to reverse engineer, like, how did AI end up with this? So I found both of those to be like good examples where I was thinking, okay, for the antibiotic example, it would take researchers like 150 years to just simply go through trial and error. So what are some other examples when I say AI that we're using today? What comes to mind for you?
Well, gosh, I mean, something every listener will understand certainly is just Amazon, right? It's your own shopping behavior. Whether it's Amazon, Old Navy, wherever you like to shop online, it learns your behavior over time. I have a 3.5-year-old and an infant. It's not giving me recommendations for dentures and something else. It's giving me recommendations based on my shopping habits of formula and teething things and whatever else they go through. So it's taking an input, it's working in a hidden layer behind the scenes, and then it's giving you an output. In our industry, I think there's a lot of examples that are using it that we're interacting with, that we don't just think about being AI driven, like BIM, building information modeling. And this is more so, I think, on the commercial side too, but architects have been using that for many, many years. It's now become more sophisticated with their modeling techniques and the software, but it's using AI. It's using what plans and things they have tweaked and used in the past, and then using that information as an input, learning from it and delivering something new that they're then using with manufacturers. We're seeing it in the early stages of 3D printing. In our industry, we're even seeing it with drones in terms of where to go in large scale, instead of putting up scaffolding somewhere in the heart of Manhattan or Boston, we're seeing drones use that capability to get information from the side of an old historic building and cladding and then deliver that down to the engineers at the bottom, right? So it's there and it's in our industry. We're just not necessarily utilizing it to our capabilities yet.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do see this continuum where generally commercial construction identifies these opportunities, they make the investment, and then there's a lag that comes to residential, and somewhere in there, depending, we might have some folks that are more on the leading edge that dealers or distributors and manufacturers are sliding in there. But it's almost like manufacturers and commercial construction, and then kind of everybody else over the longer term. But I also just think of, as someone who spends too much time on Netflix, the recommendation engines, oh,
of course,
they're looking for these patterns of, gotten sucked into this show on F1 racing, which I don't even like race cars. I'm watching a lot of that. And then I'm watching, Chris Farley movies, and it's saying, oh yes, we're looking for kind of hidden patterns there. Obviously Google search when they're filling in the blanks, Google AdWords. Before we get too far along, I want to make sure we talk about, in my mind, an underlying principle that is really the reason that so much of AI is accelerating and why this will, and currently is, and certainly will in the future, affect us all. And it's Moore's Law. So Gordon Moore, one of the founders of Intel, 1965, he identified that every 2 years, the number of transistors on an integrated circuit would double. So basically, the computational power of a single circuit doubles every 2 years. More or less, that has held, so from 1965 through today. It's slowed just a little bit, but that is still happening. And that is why the cost of this is going down so rapidly. And I think Moore's Law really provided a schedule for people to say, all right, well, if we're going to build something 2 years from now, we should assume computational power doubles. So that underlies all of this. And as I'm talking about that, Melanie, how do you think that impacts our ability to leverage AI capabilities from current suppliers and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that the more we use it, the more we're going to benefit. And if we don't, somebody else will, right? There's always and it's not even a competitor, but there's always somebody looming on the surface to disrupt an industry. And to me, there's two that stand out. There's building materials and construction, which I've spent my whole career in. And there's education in terms of industries that have yet to be disrupted strategically, innovatively. And with sort of that Moore's Law and that doubling, I think of, there's a Google senior level executive that talks about AI and computers by 2029, taking over human capability. And then there's another, by 2045, there's another data set that we get way into the cognitive behavior, computers outweighing us. And then there's going to be something else beyond computers. So it's that whole notion that in our day-to-day and in our industry, we are so far past the point of ignoring something or just saying, hey, that's not for me. We're an industry that's really people. We like touch points. We need all this stuff. We don't need all of that fuddy-duddy technology stuff. And we need to open it up to diversity of thought when it comes to computing and technology.
Just a quick thanks to one of our sponsors, and we'll get right back to the show. At the core of this podcast is our desire to help the LBM community sell more, faster, at higher margins, and have more fun doing it. That's our mission. And that's why Capital One Trade Credit is the perfect partner for this show and your business. Capital One Trade Credit's AR automation and credit management provides your professional customers with flexible credit lines and pays you up front. That's right, up front for your B2B sales, stabilizing your cash flow, allowing you to confidently grow your sales by winning new customers without the risk of non-payment. Improve cash flow, grow sales, reduce risk. That's Capital One Trade Credit. Credit approval required. Terms and conditions apply. So let me ask you, on a grading scale, A+ to F-, how would you grade our industry, lumber, building materials, right now in terms of tech adoption, considering the topic we're talking about here with artificial intelligence?
Yeah. So I think I give the industry overall a B-, but it incorporates more of the commercial segment too. I've spent my career probably equally on both sides. And I think in terms of like digital mapping and geolocation and some of our material innovations, and I think of tools like even Sherwin-Williams, like color visualizer, how we can use things technology-wise to see a product or visualize it in our space. I think as an industry overall, we're doing good. I think in our little network of dealers, I give it like a C-. And that's probably only because the pandemic has shifted that for a lot of us, with adoption of virtual meetings as opposed to getting in a plane, to going to talk about a 2022 budget and then getting back in a plane, right? Like we have so many still antiquated features. So I think we're a C- there because we're still very chunky. We might create something and then not follow through fully. We might utilize something somewhere, but it's not supported. Without going in the weeds, that's what I would give it.
Sure. All right. I'm going to give you the most obvious example to me where I would say this is where we could use AI today and it would immediately reduce rework. It would help your customers and it would drive new revenue. Again, not new at all, but if we think about Amazon, if we think about, to your point, any place that we are going that is very popular online to purchase something, artificial intelligence is driving these recommendation engines that says, if you bought A and you bought B, there's an extremely high likelihood you would want C. Do not pay for this and drift off and realize you got to come back. Our industry, we do this all the time. Somebody comes in and they say, hey, you know what? I'm just a runner from the job site. I got my pickup truck. I need A, B, C, and D. And we say, no problem. We type it up and we give it to them. And then they get back to the job site and the guy's like, dude, where are the nails? And he's like, oh, gets in his car, drives back over. That to me is feeding in you could take a dealer and say, over the last 20 years, show me every quote and order in this combination, and then just feed it in to AI and have them come back and say, okay, here's the patterns, here's the trends. 88% of the time when these three were selected, so was this, i.e., don't let anyone out of the store without asking this question. That to me was kind of the tip of the spear for me. I'm like, that everyone should do. What jumps to mind immediately that we haven't talked about so far, where you're saying like right here, this is plug and play, we can do this?
Yeah. And I've been nodding my head because it's a huge aha moment, especially when I think about our aging dealer network and industry, right? We've got counter guys that got 25, 30 years of tenure. Or my own organization, our average salesperson tenure is 13 years. You have a question about a fastener or a screw, it's in their head. How do we transfer that knowledge to a 23-year-old coming into the industry? And then how do we keep them there? How can that guy at the counter who just learned the system make a recommendation to a contractor who's making that purchase? The only way to help do that and ramp that up for scale is by using some type of machine learning and putting that data in place. But I think mostly about integration and workflows. This is not, I don't get paid for this plug. I wish I did, but I'm sort of obsessed with Monday.com. If you haven't heard of it, it's really just a workflow software. It's all internet based, but it connects all sorts of cross-functional areas. You build out your own dashboard. It can be a CRM with an HR database, with the marketing. It integrates with thousands of different apps. But I just think about how we can connect the homeowner, the contractor, the dealer, the manufacturer from inception, because we repeat that same task, right? Going back to what AI does at a basic level, which is take an identical set of situations and it just repeats, gives you the same recommendation based on identical situations. Well, somebody's coming into a showroom, a homeowner, a couple, to pick out their selections. They spend 2 hours going through plumbing fixtures, appliances, lighting, that then gets manually input to a design firm or an architect, which then and it's all email, right? We're still all using email. So we can use AI to update our networks, make them more sophisticated in how they communicate, how they make recommendations without taking out the personal human aspect, right? You still need that touch point. I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of, but I think that's one huge way is, and then of course, predictive analytics, I think for salespeople, I think we're fearful of it. And when I say it, like AI or machine learning in general, replacing like an outside sales guy, but it can equip them with the information they need, as you were talking about in your example, to make recommendations, to understand the customer, I think of like customer lifetime value and how well do we really understand our customers in terms of like that, we go through all this sales training. I'm sure, consultants and everybody knows the 80-20 rule and all types of, they're gimmicks, they're valuable, but you know what I mean? In terms of like
Yes.
Sales tools and resources we give guys, when really like if they had a rich, informative dashboard of information, they can then attribute how they spend their time with certain customers. And I think there's just a lot of valuable things that are not as intimidating as they seem when you put them in our real life scenarios.
Yeah. And to build on that, I would say once you strip them out of Excel and you put something in Excel, especially if it's just only the numericals, you look at it and you're like, what am I looking at? It looks pretty good to me. But you hit on two things to kind of take us sideways just a little bit. But I often think about this idea as we're being really intentional with our time and potential customers is this idea, not only of lifetime value of customers, which I think is extremely important and very poorly understood, but also this customer acquisition cost. And I think for folks that watch Shark Tank, they're like, well, I'm not selling widgets on the internet. This is different. And I would still say you are investing your time and your capital and your talent to pursue someone. There is a cost to that. And the better you can understand that and let alone track it. And again, I think what's exciting for me is I use Salesforce and we are leveraging the AI and part of that is that I am not assuming that I'm smarter, that I understand, that I know all these things. And I'm going to say, hey, what if I put a bunch of data in here and you look for trends, you look for patterns. I might not know why it came out this way, but the fact that it did should hopefully help me be more thoughtful on how I spend my time in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. How many people listening can relate to taking like a map of a region and trying to draw lines of where their territory reps or sales managers are going to go, right? Based on a list from Excel or a printout of their customers, as opposed to maybe instead of everything being in silos, Concur gives you information on your expense habits and your travel with that customer. And that, right, there's so many opportunities to get robust information and use it predictively about how we spend our time rather than, some of the things we do today, just sheerly out of habit, right? Or because we assume that something as sophisticated as AI as a concept can't apply to what we do in building materials.
Right.
It's just not true.
So I want to I'll ask you a quick question about bias and then maybe we'll kick over to innovation here. One of the concerns or one of the things when I think about AI and maybe some of the downsides is that obviously Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, name your social media platform of choice, is that AI is driving that. There's not a person there who's saying, oh, I see, they like the guy on the unicycle with the hip hop song in the background juggling. They want more of that. They're taking all the millions of users and saying, what are people clicking on? What might they like next? However, if you follow that logic, you could end up in this kind of personal echo chamber that I like this, I like that. And the machine says, hey, Melanie loves French cooking and whatever. Now all of a sudden, that's all you're getting, right? And obviously, we're not gonna get political here, but in the election, we saw a lot of this, and this is still happening now. And I think you got young kids. I've got a 14-year-old, and we're having conversations about where are you spending your time when you're staring at your phone for 12 hours a day, and what's that doing to your brain? But anyway, how do you think about that? The biases that we build in, if we know those are inherent, someone has to say, hey, here are the rules and here are the victory conditions. And a human being has to establish those currently. How do we think about that if I'm saying, well, hey, Melanie, Hartman, you guys are saying I need to start adopting this, but hey, aren't there some inherent risks or drawbacks? And could that be a reason for me just to say, you know what, I'm good. I'll stick with Excel.
Yeah. I think my counter to that, right? And there's my challenger nature. But the first thing I think of is our very large lack of diversity in our segment, in our corner of the industry, right? As a female executive, I've spent 15 years in this industry, and we know it is a white male dominated industry. So if we're talking about bias, just in terms of thought and groupthink and that mentality, how are we getting a diverse network of thought, whether it's brainstorming about strategy or innovation or just our life experience, if we don't have a diverse network of individuals? whether that's education, race, age, etc. So I don't know that we're necessarily at some significant advantage already where this is going to take us back. I think it will deliver us some insight that we can then take a look at and make sure that we mitigate and balance, as opposed to probably already being in a similar situation, but not really having that wherewithal today.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I like the fact when you start off and say, well, here's my counter to this. And that's, I know our audience well. I love them. I love our clients. We love them all. However, and I know this is part of why we're doing this. A lot of times when there is something new, some other industries are doing it. It is years ago, it became the norm in these industries. And we're still kind of giving it the Heisman saying, well, keep in mind, it's a little bit different over here.
It's a little bit different over here. Yep. And it's really not. We do a different thing. We sell a different widget, but it's not that much different at the end of the day. There's a service, there's a product, there's delivering a value to an end user. It's just different ways of going about it.
There's a lot more similarities than differences, I agree. How might AI, machine learning, et cetera, how will this whole topic, how could this help us innovate more and faster?
I think about this notion of constraints. So it was a professor of mine at Vanderbilt, Dr. David Owens, who, gosh, I should have wrote it down because it's going to be really embarrassing. His book is on innovation. We'll put it in the show notes. There we go. On the podcast. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yes. Well done.
Yeah, but it's this notion of approaching a constraint or a problem through the lens of innovation, but sort of like, we all know that customer pain point, right? We've all sat through some type of sales training on that. So it's solving a problem through the lens of maybe it's technology. What constraints or fail or pain points do we have in technology? What do we have in operations? What do we have in human resources? As opposed to maybe like just product innovation or just using AI for selling. How can we use it to integrate everything? That's sort of the heartbeat of what I think about.
Yeah. So as you talk about constraints, what I think about is part of those constraints are kind of the rules that you build in. And I was thinking about, and I don't know, maybe I didn't do my research well enough. Maybe this exists now, but the examples of us building a single family residential home, we have done that a lot. We have lots of takeoffs. We have lots of blueprints. We have done that for decades. We have done that for centuries, right?
Yep.
You can put in, here's the rules of what a house should look like and how long it should stand up. And then here's the victory conditions. We feed those in. How many of these homes could we feed in and then say, hey, I know we got some really smart craftsmen. I know we got some really talented framers, but is it possible? Is it possible if we say, hey, I don't care if it's made of steel. I don't care if it's made of, whatever, fill in the blank of the materials, and allow artificial intelligence to say, here's some things that you never thought was possible. Here's what we recommend. I guarantee you there are things that we haven't thought of because whether it's chess or antibiotics, which in theory, maybe not chess, certainly antibiotics, significantly more complex and more variable, and then allow the AI to come back and say, have you considered this? This is a solution. And again, when using AI, the ends justify the means. They're not going to explain how they got there. They're not going to give you the detail. They're just going to say, here you go. Now, the question is, this result that they spit out, whatever, AI is going to say, hey, this solves your rules and your victory conditions. Now what? And that to me is really exciting.
Well, and especially when you think about that, the chain and the throughput that comes from those plans and that activity of building a single house, right? Somebody is then forecasting to a manufacturer of all the building materials what that demand is going to be, right? And we do that in silos and pockets, right? We use some research and data on housing starts. We use some information from our field guys on, what's your builder going to do this year? How many homes are they going to build? That then goes through and the manufacturer takes that from 1,000 different touch points, usually all through email and something else, to then develop a forecast, right? As opposed to AI just sort of streamlining and integrating across all of these users and platforms. And that's where, if you talk about wanting to be a leader, right? The people that are listening to your podcast are the people that, I come across at strategy conferences, right? They're the type of people that are seeking new information and leading and learning. if you want to take advantage of a first mover advantage or be at the forefront of that, that's where I think the worthwhile risk is to be the first one that integrates with some of these manufacturers, and talk about, putting in a barrier to entry for any of your other competitors, right? Like just adopting this and it doesn't have to be anything major. It's just starting to understand, like, how do we educate ourselves on this and stop making assumptions that we don't need it.
Yeah, totally agree. And I'm wondering this, it's very anecdotal, far from scientific. I've just been asking and researching lots of the websites of kind of the largest dealers that I'm not working with or we're familiar with. None that I can find have a true kind of chief technology officer who's focused on this, nor have I, and especially I'll just pick on my friends in the Boston area, because of biotech and because of the fact that you can throw a stick and you're going to hit 2 universities. I'm wondering how long it's going to take for someone to say, hey, why don't we see what happens? Let's hire some kid at MIT. Maybe he's second to last in his class, still probably a genius, and bring him in and say, we got lots of data. We don't know what we're doing. Here's the data. Here's the problem. You put your head to it. Let's see what happens. How long do you think it will be before we see, all right, maybe not just one, because someone's going to reach out to me. Please do reach out to me. If you're like, by the way, what you're describing, you and Melanie, we're already doing. So get your facts straight. I will gladly accept that email. How long will it be before this is, say, common? I wouldn't even say common. 10% of the top 100 dealers in the country have at least 2 people fully dedicated to working on what we're talking about here: technology, AI, deep learning, that sort of thing.
My gut says like 10 years. I'd love for it to be like 5. It's tough, right? I'm definitely, and I think that was evident in like my question at the conference and how we met, is like, I'm a little drained, I think, with this industry as somebody who, has sort of thirsted for knowledge around strategy and innovation and empowering and moving our industry forward, to see it sort of continue to be so stagnant. And, you referenced 2008, but yeah, we're still working on technology implementations that are, from that long ago. So for 10%, yeah, maybe 5 years, because I think especially with a lot of the consolidation, we can get a couple of the large folks to understand that this is worthwhile.
Yeah. So the Builders First Source, your US LBMs, your Kodiaks, the rate of acquisition this year is absolutely stunning. And we just know statistically, the vast majority of those aren't going to realize the potential that were calculated up front. And I think companies are going to say, why aren't we, at this rate of return, it's going to be another 100 years before we pay for these 8 location fill in the blank. I think someone's saying, we're going to start with the data. We got to start doing this differently. And how can we do this to, crank up the ROI?
To your point, give a kid out of college $100,000, right, and let them just go to town, right? Like there's zero risk involved in that. Aside from them, leaving to completely disrupt the industry and start their own thing, right? But then it'll probably still benefit us all anyways.
Yeah, there was, I'm watching the time here, and again, I appreciate it. In the book that you recommended, again, that was Competing in the Age of AI by Ian Citi and Lakhani. There was just a letter that Jeff Bezos, and I might screw this up, I think it was 2001. I don't know if you remember, but it's worth reading, and we should all share this in multiple places. But in short, he issued a memo. Amazon was struggling over continuing its growth, and there was all these different silos of information. And he very courteously and very directly said, I think in, 150 words, he basically said, if you have data and Excel spreadsheets and you're hiding it within your own silo and it's not shareable, you will be fired. Create APIs so your data can be reviewed and communicated with every other part of the business. Do this or else.
Yep. And it was a very short time frame.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think, as we think about, the leadership imperative here, I think, while no, I don't think, executives of these dealers that I'm working with most often are going to do that, I think they need to be thinking about it. I think they need to be planning for it to set the stage for that to happen. But as we think about next steps for listeners and our audience to begin their own kind of, I don't know, maybe this is a little too heavy, but, kind of mental transformation to start thinking about this and how it's useful, what would your recommendation be on how they can educate themselves?
Read. I mean, some of that is pretty, I mean, it's not pretty basic. It is basic because that's what transforms your mindset. I think out of the gate is being able to see case studies from really surprising companies on how they've re-architected their firms completely without any major disruption to their day-to-day, right? I think when we think about that as a leader, oh man, I'm going to go down this path. It means I'm going to completely disrupt what we're doing now. I'm going to mess up everybody. There's going to be 1,000 questions. How can I do that? But by reading and seeing examples and case studies of how others have done it, you start to get a little bit braver with taking a risk and being a leader in that space. Then I would just hire some consultants too. And to your point, just hire a couple, we call them kids, whatever. I'm at that age now, I guess, where I can do that. But hire some 23, 24-year-olds and let them go to town with this stuff and let them make some recommendations and be open to it. Don't set a group of people internally to kind of go after e-commerce and then spin your wheels on it for 2 years. Just bring in some people, talk about, brainstorm some ideas, and then implement it right away before we're another 5 years down the road and just see what happens. Because I don't think anything that we're doing in terms of AI and getting this data and learning is going to make some major mistakes.
Right.
It's giving us information and then it's what we do with it. There's always places where you can interrupt it, make sure an order doesn't go through, right? I mean, there's just lots of ways that we can practice with it.
Yeah. And that's what I really enjoyed about your book recommendation, Competing in the Age of AI. They have some good case studies where they're giving you examples. And the one that I remember was that they talked about IKEA, what IKEA did to basically sync all their data globally. They did it in 1 week. And then they said in 3 weeks, right? And I think when we hear that, we're like, how would you even do that? They're a multi-billion-dollar company. Yeah, I'm sure they're smart. And I'm sure they had a plan. I knew what they knew what they're doing. But I don't think they were wholesale different than we could ever do.
No, and because they didn't have time, nobody has time to educate themselves and become an AI expert before they try to implement anything, right? You get the people who are knowledgeable in it. And then the whole point of it is letting the machines do the work, right? You give them a little bit of data input. They had all these hundreds of thousands of spreadsheets and stuff. So whether we're just starting with pricing, maybe you're already in some old antiquated pricing green screen and you're considering going to SAP, but there's so many other integrations and options. Why don't you just start there and dump all of it into an AI system and then see how it helps you, take into costs and supply chain and freight constraints and all those. I mean, you can just start in one facet, in one functional area before you think about integrating with other companies and manufacturers and some of the things we think about, 5 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing I struggled over, let me ask you before I finish the sentence. Do you have a Peloton bike?
Oh my gosh. So I'm literally, and we did not talk about this ahead of time. I got it on Tuesday of last week. So today's Friday. I haven't touched it yet. It's sitting, I mean, I can't show your listeners, but it's literally in view of me right now because now that I've got a preschooler, the drop-off times don't work. Long story short, I'm not motivated to work out at home at all. But it's now my 2022 gift. So Christmas, anniversary, birthday. Yeah. And it's here. So.
Okay. Well, I've got a kind of a running bet with several of my friends who went all in on the Peloton. And I'm like, I don't think you guys like riding bikes. And they're like, we do. I'm going to use this forever. I'm like, all right, we'll see about that. But they go deep into Peloton. But again, the case studies in here were great. I would also, again, strongly recommend The Age of AI by Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, and the third dude. The other thing, I think to your point, I get Wired Magazine and Fast Company. And I don't know, maybe $20, $25 a year. It shows up monthly. And I think there's often I'm reading these articles and I'm like, don't know what the hell they're talking about there. However, over time, I'm like, okay, I understand what's happening. You're hearing different examples and reading different examples in real time. It's a cheap way to read smaller stuff. I would
also recommend, so the Morning Brew newsletter, it's a 5-minute, very similar like Axios business, but they have a sub newsletter called Emerging Brew. And I can give you the link for the show notes, but it's emerging tech brew, but it's the same thing. It's a 4-minute read, 2 days a week. And it gives you the topics ahead of time. So if that's not really of interest, you just delete it. But there's a ton of AI stuff in there. And it's across all sorts of different industries, autonomous vehicles to just basic implementation in retail. And it really just helps your overall, understanding of it and how it's being applied, that it's not just in some healthcare outer space type stuff.
Yeah. Well, this was awesome. I really appreciate it. And when we had connected and I started thinking about this, forcing me to get more knowledgeable, I still feel like an idiot on these things, but less of an idiot than I did, like 6 weeks ago. So we'll put all the recommendations in here. And again, I thank you. I think one of the big lessons here to be learned is you saw something going on. A lot of people were thinking it. Nobody said it, and you did. And you got a lot of feedback from it. We're doing this here. I'm learning, and we're trying to help other people there. So thank you for that. It takes courage to speak up.
Neither one of us are experts, but I think that's usually what holds us back from having conversations like this, is because we think we can't talk about it or we don't deserve to because we're not experts. But just having the conversation and having the exposure is good enough to get the wheels turning and to start, learning about it. I think so much in this industry, the one thing we tend to do is always look for ROI first before we do something, right? Like, well, I need to know how that project's really going to hit our bottom line or benefit us. Whereas, this is one of those things where it can be a return on innovation, right? Or return on implementation, where if you just take a risk and start exploring something, there's a lot to benefit. And Lord, I want to see our industry do it before somebody else does. Right. Is really where my passion from it stems. So thank you.
I think that's right. I think it's a great place to end. Melanie Bisson, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, then, how did that go? Hopefully you learned just a few more things. I listened to this thing twice after recording it and learned several new things from Melanie. Melanie also shared a download that we are going to make available at behindyourbacksales.com/tools that she used in her MBA program. So it's a downloadable graphic, and she wanted to make it freely available. And I think it's going to help you kind of carry on this conversation within your own team. So if you did find value with this episode, with my conversation with Melanie Bisson, please share it with your team and recommend it to a friend. Why? Well, because I want this to be the best podcast you listen to, and we're always trying to make it better. So if you have recommendations for specific topics, you have specific sales challenges that you were dealing with internally with your own team, maybe it's a colleague or a boss, or maybe you are struggling with a builder. Been there, done that. I've been an annoying builder, right? So I know what it's like on the other side of the fence. Happy to do that. I want to help in any way. So if you have any suggestions to make this podcast better, do not hesitate to email me directly. That's right. Shoot it right at me. I'll read it. I promise. Bradley at behindyourbacksales.com. And a big thanks to our friends at Capital One Trade Credit, our new presenting sponsor that we're thrilled to be partnering with. If you've not listened to episode 234, featuring executive leaders at Capital One Trade Credit, Scott Simpson and Sean Cunningham, I believe you'll get a lot of value from listening to their story. As for us, it's our story. You know what it is. We're going to close out like we always do. You, my friend, you are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.